Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica, and I'm very excited to talk with you a little bit about the Story Night Ministry and the impact of sharing our stories. Well, I'll give you a little snapshot background of myself and then dive into how I came across the Story Night Ministry and what we're doing with it now. I was raised in a Christian home in one of the safest cities in America. I was pretty much a hybrid because my dad's a total California boy and my mom is a complete Southern belle from Tennessee. So I was kind of that mix between an Orange County girl and a Steel Magnolia, and grew up with the most really wonderful childhood, a wonderful family. I grew up doing theater. I was a cheerleader, heavily into academics, and then went on to the University of California, Santa Barbara. I got my degree in sociology and education and went to grad school for my teaching credential. Taught elementary school for 10 years and coached little cheerleaders and just loved it. In college is where I met my future husband, who's in the wine industry, and we just began a wonderful life. Now, in that little snapshot, it might sound like everything is perfect and great and no suffering whatsoever. Hopefully, you know well enough by now that that is not the case, that we all have a story. And someday I hope to share the full story with you of what I have been through. But I want to focus today on the story of Story Night. So, Story Night for me began in about 2015 when I finally attended a Story Night event at my church in Santa Barbara, California. The Story Night had been going on for years, and everyone always said it was the most amazing event within the women's ministry, but I just never thought to go. My inner junior high self would come out and think, I won't have anybody to sit next to, and it's going to feel awkward. And despite being a total extrovert, I still had that anxiety of going somewhere by myself. But I finally went, and I sat down in this big, beautifully decorated room full of local women from all over, women from church, of course, but lots of ladies who had never stepped foot in a church building before as well. And there were tons of round tables and beautiful centerpieces and food around, about 300 women or so. And somebody came up to kind of give a welcome, explained the purpose of Story Night, and there were some light icebreakers and some prizes given out, and somebody who performed a beautiful musical piece. And then one woman got on stage to share her life story. And it was wonderful, and she got through several chapters, and I was pretty captivated and started to understand why everybody loved this event so much. And then she just so happened to get to a chapter in her story that matched my story. And the tears started falling, thinking, oh my gosh, I am not alone. Somebody else has been through this. Someone else gets it. And that was the turning point for me. From that point on, I never missed a Story Night event. I invited everybody I knew. And what was so sweet about it is that so many of my friends that would never ever come with me to church on a Sunday morning and certainly wouldn't want to ever join a Bible study with me or maybe go on a retreat, they came to Story Night and they loved it because the way it was created had really them in mind. The woman who created Story Night is named Bonnie. She's a dear, precious friend and mentor of mine. And she noticed that women today aren't nearly as connected as they used to be, despite the fact that we live in such a highly connected world in terms of social media. But she wanted a place where we could be real and authentic and make those connections. A place where anybody could come in and feel safe and feel comfortable, whether or not they had any sort of a church background. And she was right, because it was a huge need, and hundreds of women would come to this free event over and over again. So I then moved to Oregon. So after many years of attending Story Nights and absolutely loving them, my husband and I ended up moving to Oregon. And I knew that the thing I was going to miss the most about Santa Barbara was Story Night. Well, I happened to mention story night to the leadership at the church I joined, and they really liked the idea and kind of threw it back at me to say, hey, if you want to try and host one of these, go for it. And so I did. In 2019, I asked a couple of local friends if they would be interested in being the first two story night speakers. And we held our first event in May of 2019, and about 100 women came. And we hosted another one in October of 2019, and about 150 women came. And then we got to January of 2020, and about 200 women came. And then, you know where we're at, we're in 2020, and then the pandemic hit. Well, that ended up birthing the Story Night podcast, which initially the the intent was to just record 5, maybe 10 stories of some local ladies and publish them so that ladies who were stuck inside would have something to do. They could listen to an inspiring story, and then once the lockdown was lifted, we would, maybe know each other even better. Well, we are now over 100 episodes into the Story Night podcast, and it's gone into 75 countries with getting close to, I think, about 30,000 downloads now. It's such a beautiful thing that, came out of the COVID pandemic and the shutdown. But why do this? Why do we even have this event? Why even have this podcast? Why do we share these stories? Especially when we're talking about a lot of the darkness and maybe even the ugliness of our past. Well, I think there are 2 really important reasons why we do this. We share our stories, one, for the women who have the same story, but we also share it for the women who don't have the same story. So when we share our stories and listeners hear that they are not alone, for whatever that is. It could be divorce, it could be cancer, it could be abuse, it could be bankruptcy, it could be infertility. Whatever the story is, another woman hears it and realizes, I'm not alone, somebody else gets it. And that has a lot of power. And then for the women who just have never experienced anything like that, it's so important for them to know what's really going on, because we have such a tendency to compare our stories to others or to make snap judgments, sometimes even be very critical of each other without knowing what's going on in that woman's life. So it's a dear, dear ministry to my heart. I hope that you find it important and impactful and encouraging as well. Maybe you might want to sit down and think about your own story and just start taking some notes. Write down what has happened in your life, just a little autobiographical set of bullet points, and you might see how God's been working the whole time and find that connecting thread, because we all have a story. It doesn't matter if your story is dramatic or not, but we all have a story, and it's important to share. And I believe that God has a reason for your story. And whether or not you get on stage in front of thousands of people or publish a book about your story, that's not what really matters. What matters is that you share it in some way to somebody who needs to hear it. And that might just be 1 or 2 people. I want to kind of leave you with a thought that was actually from a book I read. And I can't even remember the title of it, but the author was talking about the importance of sharing our stories and gave the analogy of water that turns into a river. This author said that when we tell our story, it's like putting a drop of water on parched land. And if nobody listens to that story or nobody else says anything, it's just going to dry up. But then if somebody else tells her story, there's another drop. And somebody else tells her story, another drop. And people are listening, and people are telling, and people are sharing, and they're being real and authentic. You have this entire river that flows of real women sharing real stories of real hope. And that's the hope I want to leave you with. Now, the great news is that we have our next live Story Night event coming up on Thursday, October 12th at 7 p.m. Doors actually open at 6:30. This is a free event that you can register at calvarymac.com/women to find the registration link. It should also be included in the episode notes here as well. And the best part of this upcoming story night is that we are featuring Rhea Joy, who is one of the coaches with It's Your Story to Tell. So I hope if you are within driving distance of McMinnville, Oregon, that you will come and join us and be around other women. Come hear an incredibly inspiring story of hope and healing. And if you're not within driving distance, don't worry. We live stream these. You can find it on Facebook, or you can find the live stream link in the registration notes as well. So with that, I want to just send you a blessing and pray over your story. I hope you take time to share your story, write it down, and listen to somebody else's story.